Construction Materials Processing. This is Mr. Voigt here. I'm going to go over the safety protocol for the jointer, which is what I'm standing at here. First thing you need to understand always when you use the jointer is how you put how you adjust depth. On this machine, this is our table and this is our fence. And the way you adjust depth is that these two tables are independent of one another. So actually the outfeed table, that's what they call this because we actually move material through it this direction. So our outfeed table is stationary, it doesn't move. And the infeed table can go up or down. So if the infeed table and the outfeed table are at the same height, the outfeed table is at the same height as our blades at their apex. So if you stick a board out over the outfeed table, those blades won't hit it. They'll just touch the bottom of it, almost. So if our infeed table is at that same height, it won't cut anything. You're going to go right over the blades without cutting. So you have to lower that infeed table just a smidge in order to take material off whatever it is you're cutting. So this infeed table is what adjusts your height. All right. The infeed table has a guard attached to it. This guard will be in place all the time, except if you happen to be cutting a certain kind of cut that I'll get to here in a second. So anyway, this table should not be adjusted by us in this classroom. This is an old machine and it's hard to adjust, so we aren't going to mess with it. The depth of cut. If you're using softwood lumber and lumber that's relatively thin, softwood lumber you could take up to, and this is key, up to a 1/16 of an inch. Hardwood lumber up to a 32nd of an inch. So half of the softwood lumber. You don't want to take large amounts off of this. If you need to take, a 1/4 inch off, then you just got to run it through that many different times in order to add those up to the thickness that you need. So 1/16 for softwood, that's the max. 32nd for hardwood, that's the max. This machine in our shop is used mainly for edge joining. I'm going to get a piece here. So we're running just our edges down it. They want you to run it needs to be at least 1 foot long in order to run this through the jointer. Preferably, they want them more than 3 inches tall. If you have it less than 3 inches tall, you're supposed to use some sort of push stick. They talk in there about one of these kinds of push sticks. We have ones that are like this. It doesn't matter, they don't want you hanging your fingers over the back end, so you need to use a push stick for anything that's less than 3 inches in width. All right? They really don't want you running your faces through the jointer. It's too hard to control the lumber and keep a hold of it. When you adjust, I just got done telling you, we aren't going to adjust this, but on the test it'll ask you, how do you make sure that your fence is 90 degrees to your table? And the answer is going to be to use a square. This particular type of square is called a tri-square. That's the right answer, tri-square, T-R-Y square. And then you can go ahead and use this tri-square to make sure you're 90 degrees. They just don't want you, the whole reason they specify is they have really big framing squares and they have combination squares. This is just the easiest thing to use. You could use any square really, but the right answer on the test is a tri-square because these are very typical in wood shops. All right. The other thing that they're going to go over on the test, we are only going to use this to cut 90-degree straight edges on our boards. In case we need to straighten a board before we use it on the table saw or need to put it up against a fence on the miter saw or something. We are just straightening edges with this. And that's what they're used for mostly in most shops. But they can do other things. So this is my rip fence. Or not my rip fence, my fence. It's not a rip fence on this machine. So I can tilt that. And if I tilt that, then I'm just cutting off this one and I put this through, I'll just be cutting off this corner. So if I just take a pass or two, I've made what we call a chamfer. That's where you just, at an angle, cut off that corner. Now if you take enough passes that you get all the way through that board at an angle, that's called a bevel. So by tilting that fence, we can cut chamfers and bevels. And what they want you to do is they want you to move this fence. See how it moves up and back too? They want you to move it so that you have less blade showing, just like on all of them, so that if you make a mistake, there's less blade to get your hand or something caught in. So they want you to pull it this way. While on here, the other type of joint you can cut on this, if you pulled this all the way out to your edge and you just cut on the very end of your cutter head, in fact, you only cut on part of the cutter head so that your board doesn't even cover it, you could cut what we call a rabbet joint. And that rabbet joint is where you just take part of a corner off so that it'll fit in with another board. So you can cut rabbet joints on this machine. Usually you have to take this guard off. It'll ask you this question, when is the only time you can take this guard off? And the answer is going to be when you're cutting rabbet joints. The one type of joint that you cannot cut that they have on one of the questions is a groove. A groove is where they literally just take a little square groove out, down the middle of a board or across the middle of a board. We call them dados. Sometimes they're called dados, sometimes they're called grooves, but they're little square strips that get cut out. You can't do that on this saw. The cutter blade's 6 inches wide. There's no way you can cut that out. So that would be the joint of the ones that they list. Chamfers, bevels, rabbets, you can all cut on here. Okay, so that's kind of the overview. The start and stop is here. You usually want to keep everything on this saw up against this fence the best you can. And obviously, we want to keep our fingers at least 6 inches away from the blade. That's the rule on all of our equipment. When you run something through, if you have something really long, you want to get a helper, just like on all of these things, and all they're supposed to do is hold it. And you want to not lose your balance. You don't want to lean over, so you have to catch yourself, like on all the equipment. Use all the PPE, like on all the equipment. And when you are doing this, you want to walk with the boards, walk back, walk with it. They don't want you to have your hand right over the cutter head, so you want to step your hands over the cutter head, if you're ever doing that. And just keep it nice and as tight to the table and to your fence as you possibly can. Okay, and if they're thin or you get too close, you're going to use a push stick. All right, I think that's all there is to it. Obviously, we're going to use this in a limited fashion in this particular shop, but we will use it. So stay safe.